She ran from the most dangerous man alive and took his children with her. 4 years. That's how long Nora Voss told herself she was free. 4 years of watching the door, changing her name twice, teaching her boys never to ask about their father. 4 years of convincing herself that what she saw that night in his study was real. His hands on her sister, the intimacy of it, the devastation. She built her entire escape on that one image burned into her skull. But tonight, the bell above the diner door chimes, and the man who owns half the Eastern Seaboard's criminal underground is standing in her doorway. And he doesn't look like a man who came to forgive. If you've ever loved someone and lost them to a lie you told yourself, stay until the end. Like, comment your city. Let me see how far this story travels. The rain came down hard off the Oregon coast that Tuesday. The kind of cold, sideways rain that found every gap in your jacket and made the short walk from the parking lot to the diner feel like a punishment. Nora Voss had stopped noticing it years ago. She moved through weather the way she moved through most things now. Head down, jaw set, focused on the next 10 minutes, and nothing beyond that. She pushed through the back entrance of Sal's diner at 5:43 in the morning, 17 minutes before her shift technically started, because Donna, the overnight waitress with the bad hip and the worse attitude, always needed to leave early on Tuesdays for her sister's dialysis appointment. Nora never said anything about it. She just showed up early and pretended it was her idea. The kitchen smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee and the industrial cleaner that never quite cut through either. Miguel, the line cook, nodded at her from behind the flat top. He was a man of almost no words, which was one of the things Nora respected most about him. She hung her wet jacket on the hook by the mop sink, tied her apron, and checked the counter. 3 customers. 2 truckers at the far end sharing a newspaper, and an older woman near the window nursing a decaf and staring at the rain like it owed her money. Nora grabbed the coffee pot and started her rounds. This was her life. She had made peace with it, mostly. The twins were at Mrs. Calder's apartment 2 blocks over. The woman watched them overnight on the nights Nora pulled a double, in exchange for Nora covering her grocery runs and occasionally helping her navigate her phone when her grandchildren sent her things she couldn't figure out. It was a trade. Everything in Nora's life now was a trade of some kind, a careful and exhausting balancing act of favors and timing, and never ever asking for more than you absolutely had to. Jack and Noah were 4 years old. They would be 5 in February. Jack had his father's eyes, but that specific shade of gray that wasn't quite blue and wasn't quite silver. The kind of eyes that made you feel like they were already a step ahead of what you were saying. She had known it from the moment he was born. That first second when the nurse laid him on her chest and he looked up at her with those eyes, and her whole chest had caved in with love and grief at the exact same time. Noah had her eyes, dark brown, almost black. He was the quieter one, the observer, the one who watched a situation for a long time before he decided how he felt about it. Jack threw himself at the world head first. Noah mapped the terrain first. She loved them so much it was sometimes physically painful. A pressure in the sternum, a tightness in her throat when she watched them sleep, when she thought about how close she'd come to making different choices. She refilled the trucker's coffee without being asked. One of them looked up and said thanks. The other one didn't. This was fine. This was exactly fine. At 7:15, the breakfast rush hit, if you could call it that in a town of 4,000 people on the northern Oregon coast in November. Nora moved fast, kept her head clear, took orders and ran plates, and kept the coffee coming. The work required just enough concentration to prevent actual thinking, which had been its primary appeal when she first stumbled into this job 4 years ago, broke and 8 months pregnant and desperate enough to take anything. Sal, the owner, had looked at her belly and then at her face and said, "You got waitressing experience?" She'd said yes, which was mostly true. She'd done it summers during college, before Dominic Varro had walked into her life and rearranged every priority she'd ever had. Sal had said, "You running from something?" She'd said no. He'd looked at her for a long moment, then handed her an apron. She had never asked if he believed her. It didn't matter. He'd hired her. He'd given her Tuesday and Thursday mornings off when the boys started pre-K. When the transmission on her 12-year-old Civic had gone out last winter, he'd fronted her the repair cost without interest and let her work it off in extra shifts. He was a hard man and not always a kind one, but he had never let her down, which put him ahead of almost everyone else in her personal history. The morning passed the way mornings did, fast and slow, at the same time. one eye always on the clock, one part of her brain always running numbers. Rent was due in 9 days. She had most of it. She had about 80% of it, which meant she needed a good week in tips, and she needed the car not to have any problems, and she needed Noah's ear infection prescription to be covered by the insurance. She paid a humiliating amount for each month. She did not need complications. At 9:40, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Mrs. Caldera. Jack woke up crying. He says his stomach hurts. Should I bring them to you, or do you want me to call? Nora stared at the message for 3 seconds, then typed back, I'll come on my break at 10. Don't let him eat anything yet. She pocketed the phone and kept moving. Jack had anxiety that sometimes settled in his stomach, the pediatrician had explained. He was a sensitive kid underneath the bravado. When things were off in his world, his gut knew it before his brain did. She thought about that sometimes, about whether it was something he'd inherited, some ancestral knowledge of danger, some cellular memory of the world she'd pulled him out of before he was even born. She stopped thinking about it by the time she reached table 4. Her break came and she walked fast through the rain to Mrs. Caldera's building, took the stairs 2 at a time to the 3rd floor, knocked twice in their specific pattern. The door opened and Noah was standing there in his dinosaur socks, looking profoundly unbothered by the situation, which was very Noah. Jack thinks he's dying, Noah reported. Jack thinks he's dying every time he has a stomachache. I know, I told him that. What did he say? He said, I don't have feelings. Nora stepped inside. The apartment smelled like Mrs. Caldera's particular brand of air freshener, artificial rose and something underneath it that was just old building. The boys' backpacks were by the door. Jack was on the couch with a blanket pulled up to his chin, looking both genuinely uncomfortable and deeply theatrical about it. Hey, Bug, Nora said, sitting on the edge of the couch, pressing the back of her hand to his forehead. No fever. My stomach really hurts, Jack said. His gray eyes were wide and a little wet at the corners. I know. She kept her voice steady. Did you eat anything weird last night? No. Did something happen at school yesterday? Before I picked you up? A pause. Just a half-second pause, but she caught it. Jack looked away from her toward the window. Tyler said my dad is probably dead, he said, very quietly, because I don't have one. Something happened in Nora's chest. A quick, vicious tightening. She breathed through it. Tyler's wrong, she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. But where is he? He lives far away. This was the story. The story was, your father lives far away, and it's complicated, and someday when you're older, I'll explain. It was a bad story. She knew it was a bad story. She just didn't have a better one that she could survive telling. Jack looked back at her. Those gray eyes, sharp and already a little too knowing for a 4-year-old. Is he looking for us? He asked. The tightening in her chest became something else entirely. Something cold. No, sweetheart, she said. He doesn't know where we are. She believed that. She had to believe that. She had been careful. No social media, no credit cards tied to her real name, a new driver's license obtained through channels she preferred not to think about too hard. She had been so careful for so long that the carefulness had become its own kind of exhaustion, a constant low hum of vigilance that never fully powered down. She got the boys settled, promised Jack a grilled cheese for dinner, kissed both of them on their heads, and walked back to the diner in the rain. What she did not see, because she was watching her feet and thinking about the rent in her son's gray eyes, was the black SUV parked on the opposite side of the street. What she did not see was the man in the passenger seat, with a photograph open on his phone, looking from the photograph to her and back again. What she did not see was him picking up his phone and making a call. She went back to work. That night, after she'd picked the boys up from school, after the grilled cheese and the bath, and the specific negotiation required to get 2 4-year-olds to sleep that involved 3 books and 2 rounds of a song that had been sung so many times it had lost all meaning, she sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside her and paid her bills. Or rather, she looked at her bills. She moved numbers around in her head. She made decisions that weren't really decisions because there was only one possible outcome from any of them. The apartment was small enough that she could hear the boys breathing through the thin wall between the kitchen and the room they shared. She had learned to find this comforting rather than depressing. She had learned a lot of things in 4 years that she would have found unimaginable before. she didn't let herself think about before, as a general rule. It was like pressing on a bruise. You could do it, but the information you got from it wasn't useful. It just hurt. But tonight Jack's question was sitting in her chest like a stone. Is he looking for us? Dominic Varro did not lose things he considered his. She had known that about him from the beginning. It was part of what had drawn her to him, that absolute certainty, that complete refusal to accept limitations. When Dominic wanted something, the universe rearranged itself. She had watched it happen so many times it had started to feel like a law of physics. She had also watched what happened to people who tried to take things from him. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. She was tired. She was always tired. That was fine. Tired she could work with. She did not think about the black SUV because she had not seen it. She went to bed at 10:30, set her alarm for 4:55, and lay in the dark listening to the ocean a half-mile away, and the rain against the window, and her son's breathing, and eventually she slept. The next morning was Wednesday, her day off. She had a list: grocery store, pharmacy for Noah's prescription, the library because she'd promised Noah she'd return his books, and the laundromat because the building's shared machine was broken again and had been for 2 weeks. She packed both boys into their coats and their boots with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that getting 2 small children ready to leave the house was actually a military operation requiring strategy and an absolute refusal to be distracted. Jack had forgotten one boot. Noah had, for reasons he could not explain, put his jacket on inside out. They made it out of the building by 8:47, which Nora counted as a victory. The grocery store was 4 blocks away. She let the boys walk because they needed to move, because 4-year-olds who had not been adequately moved before noon were 4-year-olds who fell apart in the afternoon, and she did not have the reserves for a falling apart afternoon today. Jack walked fast and slightly ahead, like he was scouting. Noah held her hand and looked at things. A pigeon, a crack in the sidewalk, a flattened aluminum can that he picked up and examined with genuine scholarly interest before she made him put it back down. "Why?" he asked. "Because people have touched that." "I touched it." "I know." "So now it's not just people, it's me." She did not have an answer to this. She filed it under the long list of things Noah said that she suspected meant something interesting was happening in his brain, and she just wasn't smart enough to follow it all the way. At the grocery store, she gave them each a task. Jack was responsible for finding the bread. Noah was responsible for the apples. Because tasks gave Jack something to channel his energy into and gave Noah something to analyze. She worked through her list efficiently, kept one eye on both boys, stayed focused. She did not notice the man in the cereal aisle watching her. She did not notice because he was careful. He had been trained by people who were very good at not being noticed. She paid cash, as she always did. They left the store. The rain had stopped and there was weak November sunlight coming through the clouds, and Jack immediately ran ahead to jump in a puddle and soaked his right boot through, and Noah watched this happen with an expression of profound philosophical resignation. "He knows that's going to be uncomfortable," Noah said. "He does," Nora agreed, "but he did it anyway." "He did? Why?" She looked at the puddle, at Jack, who was now examining his wet foot with the kind of wondering detachment that she recognized as his version of Noah's philosophical resignation. Like the world was endlessly surprising and not always in a good way, but that was kind of interesting too. "Because sometimes the puddle is worth it," she said. Noah thought about this. He was quiet the whole block to the pharmacy. At the pharmacy, she waited for Noah's prescription. The boys sat in the plastic chairs along the wall and shared the headphones attached to her phone, watching something about dinosaurs that Noah had been revisiting obsessively for 3 weeks. They were good. They were her good boys, and she loved them so much it made her throat tight. She took the prescription bag from the pharmacist. She turned around. There was a man standing just inside the pharmacy entrance. He was big, not dramatically, not in a way that would attract attention, but in the way of someone whose body had been trained for utility. Dark coat, dark hair, a face she didn't recognize, which meant nothing. Dominic's people all had faces she didn't recognize. That was the point. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the boys. Every cell in Nora's body went cold. She walked to her sons. She took Noah's hand, gently disconnected the headphones from the phone, tucked it in her pocket. "We're going," she said. "But the dinosaur." "We're going right now, baby." Something in her voice reached Noah. He stood immediately. Jack looked up, read his brother's face, read her face, and stood too. He didn't argue. Whatever Jack was, he had never been oblivious. She walked them to the door. The man stepped aside to let them through. He did not look at her. He looked at Jack. And Jack, who had his father's eyes and his father's uncanny instinct for the temperature of a room, looked back at him for just a moment, and then looked up at Nora with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not fear exactly. Something more complicated. Recognition. They hit the sidewalk. She kept them moving, her hand tight around Noah's. Jack pressed close against her other side. 3 blocks. 2 blocks. 1 block. She pushed through the door of their building, hit the stairs, got them inside the apartment, locked the deadbolt and the chain. She stood with her back against the door, breathing. The boys were watching her. "Mom?" Noah said. "1 second," she managed. She crossed to the window, looked down at the street. A car was parked at the corner that hadn't been there this morning. Black. American. The engine was running. She had been found. After 4 years and every precaution she knew how to take, and a life rebuilt from nothing, she had been found. And the worst part, the part that hit her like a fist to the sternum as she stood there watching that idling car, was that some part of her had always known this day was coming. Some part of her had never really stopped waiting for it. She turned away from the window. Jack was standing in the middle of the kitchen with his wet boot still on his foot, looking at her with those gray eyes that were his father's eyes. And he said very quietly, "We have to go somewhere, don't we?" It wasn't a question. She looked at her son, this 4-year-old boy who had somehow already inherited the particular kind of knowing that she had spent 4 years running from, and something broke open in her chest. "Yeah, Bug," she said, "we do." She moved fast. She had a bag. She had always had a bag, packed, half-packed, ready at the back of the closet for the moment she hoped would never come. Change of clothes for all 3 of them. Cash she'd been putting aside $50 at a time for the last 2 years. The boys' birth certificates and her real documents. She grabbed it. She grabbed the boys' backpacks from the hook by the door. Her hands were shaking. She didn't let herself think about where she would go. There was no plan for this. She had a bag and cash and a car, and she would drive north and figure it out, and she would keep her boys safe. She would keep them safe. That was the only thing that mattered. She picked up her phone to call Mrs. Caldera, and then it buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. She stared at it. It buzzed again. She answered because she already knew who it was, and because refusing to answer didn't change what was already happening. Nora. His voice. 4 years and it landed on her like a physical weight. That low, unhurried, absolutely controlled voice that had once made her feel like the safest person alive. She said nothing. "Don't run," Dominic Vero said. "There's nowhere left to go." She didn't hang up. That was the first mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe it was just the moment her body finally stopped pretending it had any say in what happened next. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. "Long enough." A pause, not hesitation. Dominic Vero didn't hesitate. It was something else. Deliberate spacing, the way he'd always spoken, like every word cost something and he intended to get full value from each one. "Come outside, Nora." "No. I'm not asking." "I know you're not." She moved to the window again, looked down. The black car was still there. A second one had joined it, parked just behind. "How many men did you bring?" "Enough?" "That's not an answer. It's the only one you need." She turned away from the window. The boys were watching her from the kitchen doorway. Noah's hand had found Jack's sleeve, and he was holding on to it, which was how Noah handled things he couldn't analyze his way out of. Jack was watching her face with that gray-eyed focus that made her want to cry and scream at the same time. She pressed the phone against her shoulder and mouthed, "Bedroom, sit on the bed, wait for me." Noah went immediately. Jack held for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to make clear he was doing it by choice, not command, then followed his brother. She put the phone back to her ear. "The boys are here," she said. "I know." Something shifted in his voice, just slightly, like a plate moving underground before an earthquake. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it in your feet. "I know about the boys, Nora." The words hit her like cold water. Of course he knew. He'd had someone watching her for who knew how long. Long enough. And Jack's eyes, if any of his people had gotten close enough to see Jack's eyes, that was all they would have needed. "They're mine," she said. It came out low and a little ragged, and she hated herself for how desperate it sounded. "They're ours." No anger in it. That was almost worse than anger. "Come outside. We don't do this on the phone." She stood in the middle of her small apartment with its second-hand furniture and its window that wouldn't close all the way, and the drawing Jack had made at school taped to the refrigerator. A house with 4 people in it, which had made her chest hurt when she'd first seen it because there were only 3 of them. And she understood with complete clarity that there was no version of the next hour that looked like the last 4 years, that life was already over. She went to the bedroom. The boys were sitting on the bed side by side, Noah's shoulder pressed against Jack's, and they looked so small and so serious that she had to stop in the doorway for a second and just breathe. "Okay," she said. "We're going to go meet someone." "The man from the pharmacy?" Jack said. "No, someone else." "Who?" She looked at her son, his father's eyes, waiting. "I'll explain after," she said. "Right now I need you both to stay right next to me and hold my hand and not let go." "Can you do that?" Noah nodded immediately. Jack said, "Will it be scary?" "Maybe a little." "Okay," Jack said. Just like that. Okay. Like he'd already decided that whatever it was, he was going to walk into it standing up. She didn't know whether to be proud of him or terrified that he'd learned that from DNA he'd never been exposed to. They went downstairs. She kept them close, one hand on each of them, her bag over her shoulder. The front door of the building opened onto a narrow covered stoop and then 4 steps down to the wet sidewalk, and at the bottom of those steps was a man she'd never seen before, tall, compact, watchful, who simply stepped to the side without a word. The black car was 20 feet away. The rear door opened. Dominic Vero stepped out. 4 years. He was exactly the same and completely different. Older maybe, something around his eyes. A sharpness that had been there before but was more settled now, more permanent. He wore a dark wool coat, no tie, his hands at his sides. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read, and she had once prided herself on being able to read him, had spent 2 years learning the specific vocabulary of his silences and his jaw and the exact angle of his shoulders. And then his gaze dropped to the boys. She felt it. The moment he saw them. Not her reaction, but his. The way his entire body went very still. The way something crossed his face that she had never seen there before in all the time she had known him. Something raw and enormous that he pulled back immediately, but not before she caught it. He looked at Jack first. He couldn't help it. Jack was looking right back at him with those gray eyes. His eyes, a perfect copy. And the silence between the 3 of them lasted only 2 or 3 seconds, but felt like something being permanently altered. Then Dominic looked at Noah, then back at her. "Nora," he said. "Don't," she said. He walked toward her. She held her ground, her hands tightening slightly on the boy's shoulders. He stopped 6 feet away, and she was grateful for the distance because up close he had always had a particular gravity that she had never fully worked out how to resist. "How old?" he said quietly. 4. Something moved through him, quick and controlled, and then gone. "February," she said before she could stop herself. "They'll be 5 in February." He looked at the boys again, really looked, the way he looked at things he was committing to memory. And then he looked at her with an expression that wasn't anger, not exactly, though anger was there underneath it. The thing on top was something harder to name. "Get in the car," he said. "No." "Nora." "I said no, Dominic. You don't get to show up, and you've been living 4 blocks from the ocean in a building with a broken lock on the front door for 2 years. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was one of the things about him. The quieter he got, the more dangerous it was, and right now he was extremely quiet. "There's a man named Reyes who's been running product through this county for 8 months, and he has a very specific interest in collecting debts from people connected to me. You want to have this argument on the street, or you want to get in the car?" She stared at him. "I don't know you anything," she said. "No." His eyes held hers. "But they might." She hated him for that. She hated him for being right, for being able to read a situation faster than she could, for standing there in his expensive coat in her broken little life and making her feel the gap between what she'd had and what she'd chosen like a physical thing. She looked down at Jack. Jack was looking at Dominic with an expression that she had no category for. "Come on," she said flatly, and walked toward the car. The inside of the SUV smelled like leather and money, and something faintly chemical underneath, the specific scent she associated with the kind of security detail that had been in a lot of uncomfortable situations. 2 men in the front, driver and passenger, neither of them looking back. She settled the boys in the middle row and sat between them. Dominic folded himself into the seat across, facing them, and pulled the door shut. The car moved. Noah looked out the window with scholarly interest. Jack looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at Jack. The silence had texture. "What's your name?" Dominic said. His voice was different. Not softer exactly, but something in the delivery had changed. Careful, like approaching something he could break if he moved wrong. Jack didn't answer immediately. He was a child who did not give things away cheaply, which was another thing she could not explain without admitting something she was not prepared to admit. "Jack," he said finally. "Jack." Dominic repeated it like he was learning the weight of it. "I'm Dominic." "I know," Jack said. Nora's head turned sharply. "You know?" she said. Jack shrugged one shoulder, a gesture so specific that it knocked the air out of her lungs because she had seen that gesture 10,000 times on a different face. "You say his name when you think we're asleep." She said nothing. She had no response to that. She had apparently been less careful than she thought in ways that had nothing to do with black cars and surveillance. Noah turned from the window. He looked at Dominic with those dark, measuring eyes. "Are you our dad?" Noah asked. The car was very quiet. Dominic looked at her, a question without words, and beneath it something she hadn't expected. He was asking her permission, or at least acknowledging that there was a question to be asked. She looked straight ahead. She didn't give him anything. "Yes," Dominic said. He looked back at Noah. "I am." Noah absorbed this. He nodded slowly, like a conclusion confirmed by data. Jack said nothing. He turned and looked out his own window, and she saw his jaw, his father's jaw, set in a way that she recognized as Jack managing something too large for his current vocabulary. She wanted to put her arm around him. She wanted to tell him it was okay. She didn't know how to do that without it being a lie. They drove for 40 minutes north along the coast highway, then turned inland on a road she didn't know, then up a private drive through Douglas fir so dense it closed out the sky. The house at the end of the drive was not what she'd expected, though she wasn't sure what she'd expected. Something aggressive, maybe, something that announced itself. This was a long, low structure of timber and glass, tucked into the hillside like it had grown there, expensive in the way that no longer needed to announce itself. There were men at the gate, men at the door. Not aggressive, not visible unless you knew to look for them, but there. She knew to look for them. Inside, the house was warm and clean and smelled like wood smoke. It was not lived in. She could tell that immediately, the careful neatness of a place that was maintained rather than inhabited. A safe house, then, or the closest thing to one that Dominic Vero bothered with. A woman appeared, 50s, efficient, no wasted motion, and asked the boys if they were hungry. Noah said yes before Nora could say anything. Jack looked at Nora first, waiting for her signal. "It's okay," she said, low. Jack went. She watched them disappear into what appeared to be a kitchen, and then she turned to Dominic. "How long?" she said. 6 weeks. He moved to a window, looked out at the tree line, standing with his back to her, which she knew was deliberate. He didn't want her to see his face for this part. "We found the apartment 6 weeks ago. I've had people on you since Tuesday." The pharmacy. Among other places. "Why didn't you come sooner?" He turned then, and his face was composed and controlled, and underneath it something else. "Because I needed to be certain before I moved, and because I needed to decide how to do this without—" He stopped. "Without scaring them," she finished. "Without making it worse than it already is." His eyes cut to her, sharp. "Which was going to be difficult, given the circumstances." "The circumstances," she repeated. "That's what you're calling it. What would you call it?" "I'd call it 4 years of my life. I'd call it two kids who've been growing up without their father. You'd call it your choice, he said. Very flat, very contained. Because it was. She stopped. He crossed the room toward her and she held herself very still as he stopped 2 feet away, which was close enough that she could see the specific controlled anger in his face, the thing he was working to keep behind glass. You ran, he said. You didn't come to me. You didn't confront me. You didn't say a single word. You took... He broke off. His jaw tightened. You were pregnant and you ran, and I spent 2 years thinking you were dead. I know what you thought. Do you? It wasn't a question. I saw what I saw, Dominic. What did you see? His voice dropped. Tell me. After 4 years, tell me what you saw that made you take my unborn children and disappear. I saw you with my sister. The words came out scraped raw. In your study. Your hands on her. The door was almost closed, but not quite, and I saw enough. Enough, he said. You saw enough. Yes. And you left. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Something was happening in his face that she couldn't read, which had never happened before. She had always been able to read him. It had been the one skill she'd trusted. And it was disorienting enough that she almost stepped back. We'll talk about what you saw, he said, but not now, not tonight. Then when? When you're not about to fall apart, and neither am I. The honesty of that hit her sideways. Dominic Vero admitting proximity to falling apart was so far outside her experience of him that she had no prepared response. She looked away first. The boys stay with me, she said. Whatever else happens, they're mine. Ours. Don't. Nora. He waited until she looked at him. I'm not taking them from you. I'm not that man. He held her gaze. But I'm also not going away. We need to be clear about that right now before anything else. She believed him. She hated that she believed him. She had spent 4 years constructing a version of Dominic Vero that made her choices rational, that made her flight reasonable and necessary and correct. She had needed him to be the thing she feared so that the fear made sense, so that the running made sense, so that the poverty and the loneliness and the exhausted mornings and the bills and the stomachache conversations about absent fathers all added up to something worth the cost. Standing in the same room with him, she could feel that construction under pressure. She didn't say any of that. She said, I need to see where the boys are sleeping. He showed her. The rooms were prepared, but properly, not as an afterthought. Someone had anticipated children, had put things in place. She didn't want to think about what that meant, about whether he'd been preparing for this moment for longer than 6 weeks. She found the boys in the kitchen with the efficient woman who turned out to be named Cora, eating grilled cheese sandwiches with an efficiency that suggested neither of them had eaten since breakfast. Noah was asking Cora detailed questions about the origin of the bread. Jack was eating and watching the kitchen doorway with those gray eyes. When he saw her, something in him relaxed, just slightly, just enough that she could see it. She sat down at the counter and Cora put a cup of coffee in front of her without asking, and she drank it because the alternative was thinking, and she was not ready to think yet. Later, after the boys were in bed, both of them going down easier than she'd expected, worn out by the day's wait, she stood in the hallway outside their door and listened to their breathing settle and tried to figure out what she was going to do. There was no good answer. Running was off the table. She understood that now, not because Dominic had said it, but because she had looked at Jack's face in that car and understood that her son had been carrying something for 4 years that she hadn't been able to see, and running meant carrying it further, and she was tired. She was so profoundly tired of running. Staying meant Dominic. It meant his world and his enemies and the specific danger that came with both. It also meant, and she couldn't let herself look at this directly yet, could only see it in her peripheral vision. It meant finding out whether what she saw 4 years ago was what she thought she saw. She heard him behind her. He moved quietly for a big man, but she had learned his quiet years ago, and it was in her body still. They're good kids, he said. I know. You did that. She didn't answer. He was silent for a moment, then, there's something I need to show you, tomorrow, when you're ready. There's something you need to know about the night you left. She turned. He was standing in the hallway, hands in his coat pockets, watching her with that stripped-down expression that she was beginning to recognize as what his face looked like when he stopped performing control. "What is it?" she said. "Not tonight." He shook his head. "Get some sleep, Nora. You look like you haven't slept properly in 4 years." She almost said, "I haven't." She stopped herself. "And if I try to leave?" she said. His eyes held hers. "You won't," he said. She wanted to argue with that. She had excellent arguments prepared. But she stood in the hallway of this warm house with her boys breathing behind the door and Dominic Varro 3 feet away, and what she understood, what landed on her like the full weight of everything she had been running from, was that he wasn't keeping her here with men at the gate or cars on the road. He was keeping her here with the truth, and the truth, whatever it turned out to be, was something she could no longer outrun. Down the hall, in the room that functioned as a study, on a table near the window, her phone lit up with a message from a number she didn't recognize. She didn't see it, but one of Dominic's men did, and 30 seconds later he was standing in the doorway of the study with his jaw tight, and he said, "Boss, we have a problem." Dominic looked at him. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. That specific shift from a man dealing with the wreckage of his personal life to the man who ran the Eastern Seaboard's most dangerous organization. The shift she had always found both frightening and compelling and had never fully made peace with. "Show me," he said, and walked toward the door without looking back at her. She stood alone in the hallway. From inside the study, low and even. "How many?" And then, "When?" And then quieter, in a register she had heard only a handful of times and had spent 4 years trying to forget. "Get everyone in. We move at dawn." Her back hit the wall. Whatever fragile suspension of reality this night had offered, the careful dinner, the prepared bedrooms, the almost conversation in the hallway, was over. The world Dominic Varro lived in had just arrived at his door, and her sons were asleep 20 feet away, and there was not a single version of the next 12 hours that she had any plan for. Her phone on the table in the study lit up again. This time the message read, "We know she's with him. Give us the children by morning or we burn it all down." She read the message 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it the first time. She understood it perfectly the first time. She read it 3 times because some part of her brain was still trying to find a version of those words that meant something different, some angle of interpretation that didn't land where it landed. "We know she's with him. Give us the children by morning or we burn it all down." Her hands were steady. She noticed that with a kind of distant surprise, that her hands were completely steady while everything else in her was in free fall. She walked to the doorway of the study. Dominic was standing at the far end of the room with his back to her, phone at his ear, one hand braced against the window frame. 2 of his men were near the door. She registered them without looking at them directly, the way you registered furniture. A third was at the desk, laptop open, typing with the focused efficiency of someone translating a crisis into logistics. "Dominic," she said. He held up one finger, not dismissive. A genuine request for 30 seconds, the same gesture he'd used in boardrooms and restaurants and the back of cars, the universal signal of a man managing 17 things simultaneously. She walked into the room anyway. "Dominic?" She held up the phone. He turned, looked at the screen. Something in his face went very flat, very fast, the way a lake goes flat before a storm. All the surface energy pulled inward. He said something short and quiet into his phone and ended the call. "When did this come in?" he said. "Just now, 2 minutes ago." He took the phone from her hand, looked at the number, passed it to the man at the desk without a word. The man took it and started working. "Who is it?" she said. "Reyes." He said the name like it was something he was already done with, already past, already in the process of handling. "I told you about him in the car. You said he had an interest in debts connected to you." "He does." Dominic moved to the desk, looked at the laptop screen, said something to his man in a voice too low for her to catch. "He's been building a case for 6 months that my operation owes him for a shipment that was lost on his end. It wasn't our loss. He's decided to disagree. And he knows I'm here." He knew within the hour. A muscle in his jaw tightened. "I have a leak. I'm aware of that. We're handling it." "You're handling it." She heard her own voice, the flatness in it. "Someone just threatened my children, and you're handling it." He turned to look at her fully, which he hadn't done since she walked in. Yes, he said. That is exactly what I'm doing. They want you to give them Jack and Noah. No. His voice was absolute. They want leverage. The children are the leverage. What they actually want is a conversation about money, and they've chosen a method of starting that conversation that they believe will give them the advantage. He held her gaze. They are wrong. You sound very certain. I am. People who are wrong about leverage tend to hurt the leverage first and negotiate second. The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough to confirm that he knew this. I need you to go back to the boys' room, he said. No. Nora, I am not sitting in a bedroom while someone threatens my children, Dominic. Tell me what's happening. All of it. Right now. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said something to both men in the room. A word each. Both of them moving immediately, one to the door and one to an adjacent room. And then they were alone, and he crossed his arms and looked at her with that stripped expression she'd first seen in the hallway. Reyes has 4 men on the property perimeter, he said. My people have identified 3 of the 4. We'll have the 4th in the next 20 minutes. We also have 8 men on site and another 6 en route from the Portland location who will be here before 4 a.m. So we're outnumbered right now. For approximately 90 minutes, yes. She absorbed this with the specific kind of calm that was not really calm at all, but the thing that lived on the other side of panic, when panic became a luxury you couldn't afford. The boys can't stay in those rooms, she said. If someone breaches there's a room below the house. He said it without waiting for her to finish, which meant he'd already been thinking it. Reinforced. Single entry point that my people control. I need you to take them there now, before we move on Reyes's men. You're going after them. I'm not waiting for them to decide they're done being patient. She looked at him. She thought about all the versions of this conversation she'd imagined over 4 years. The confrontation with Dominic that she'd mentally rehearsed 100 times. The things she would say. The anger she would deploy. She had never once imagined it would happen while someone was threatening her children from the tree line. After, she said. After what? After this is over. You said you had something to show me, something about the night I left. She held his gaze. I want that. After. Something crossed his face. After, he confirmed. She went to the boys. Getting them up was harder than getting them down. Noah surfaced from sleep slowly, needing a moment to reassemble reality, and Jack woke instantly and completely the way he always did, sitting upright and already scanning, already reading the air. We have to move, she told them quietly. Come on. Bring your blankets. Is it bad? Jack asked. It's going to be fine. That's not what I asked. She looked at her 4-year-old son, this child who had inherited his father's absolute refusal to accept an answer that wasn't an answer. It's complicated right now, she said. But we're going somewhere safer, and then it won't be. Jack got up. He brought his blanket and he took his brother's hand, and he walked into the hallway without being asked again. She followed them both with her chest full of something that had no clean name. Dominic was in the hallway. He looked at the boys, at Jack specifically, and something in the look made her understand that whatever else was true about this man and the world he operated in, what she was seeing on his face right now was not performance. Jack looked back at him. Are you going to keep us safe? Jack said. Dominic crouched down so he was eye level with both boys. It was a gesture so uncharacteristic of the man she remembered, who had always occupied space vertically, who had always looked at the world from his full height, that it stopped her in place. Yes, he said. Promise, Noah said. I don't make promises I can't keep. Noah considered this. That's a good policy, he decided. Something moved across Dominic's face that she had no word for. He straightened, turned to her and said, Cora will take them down. I need 2 minutes with you first. Cora appeared from somewhere. The woman had a quality of appearing exactly when needed that Nora had already noted, and took the boys with calm efficiency, blankets and all, down a hallway and through a door that looked like a closet and wasn't. Nora stood in the hallway with Dominic. 2 minutes, she said. There's something you need to know before this gets loud. He said it carefully, like each word was weight-bearing. Your sister, Mara. She's the leak. The floor didn't move. The floor was completely stationary. It just felt like it moved. What? She said. Mara has been in contact with Reyes for at least 3 weeks. We intercepted communication this afternoon. She told him you were here. She told him about the boys. He paused. She told him their names. Nora heard her own breathing. She heard it in a way she didn't usually hear it, like the sound was coming from outside her body. That's not... She stopped. I know it's not what you want to hear. Mara wouldn't... She has debt with Reyes. Has had it for years, apparently. She's been working it off in various ways. His voice was completely level. This was one of the ways. Nora put her hand against the wall. Not because she needed support. She told herself it was not because she needed support, but because the hallway had gotten very narrow suddenly, and she wanted something solid. You're sure? She said. Yes. Show me. Nora, show me the communication. Whatever you intercepted, I want to see it. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. He led her back to the study, to the man at the laptop, and she stood and read what was on the screen. It was Mara's number. She had that number memorized, had never called it in 4 years, but had held it in her head like a coal she couldn't put down, evidence that some thread of connection still existed. The number was right there in a chain of messages that went back 3 weeks. She's somewhere on the Oregon coast, working as a waitress, has 2 kids. And later, found her. She's in Kessler, a diner called Sal. And then, 6 days ago, she's with Varro now, north of town. I can get you the address. She read it 3 times, same as the first message, looking for the other interpretation, the angle that changed the meaning. There wasn't one. She stepped back from the laptop. Mara, the sister she had blown up her entire life to protect. The sister whose embrace with Dominic had been the image that destroyed everything. That image which she now, standing in this study with this evidence in front of her, began to look at differently, began to pull apart. The night I left, she said. Her voice came from somewhere far away. You said you wanted to show me something. It can wait. Tell me right now. She turned to face him. Tell me what happened that night, with Mara. Tell me all of it. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. She came to my study, he said. She didn't knock. I didn't know she was going to be there. She'd come to the house to see you, apparently, but you were out. She was in bad shape. I didn't know then how bad. He spoke without inflection, like he was reading from a report. She'd been running from Rhea's people for 2 days. They'd caught up with her that afternoon, in the parking structure off Mercer. They cut her. Here. He drew a line across his own ribs with one finger. She got to the house because she didn't know where else to go. She was losing blood faster than I understood at first. Bossetta. Nora's lips were numb. I got her to the couch. I was trying to stop the bleeding with my hands. His eyes held hers, steady and without apology. I had my phone out to call for the doctor. I was talking to her, trying to keep her conscious. That's what you saw. She heard it. She heard every word of it. She heard it land in the place where the image had lived for 4 years. The image of his hands on her sister, the closeness, the door that was almost shut. And she felt the 2 things collide. The thing she had believed and the thing she was being told, pressing against each other in her chest until something cracked. You should have told me, she said. You were gone by morning. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it wasn't. By the time I knew you'd left, you'd had 6 hours. By the time I understood you weren't coming back, you should have found me sooner. I tried. The control in his voice fractured, just slightly, just enough. Nora, I tore this country apart looking for you. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I had people in every state. I called in favors that cost me more than you know. I looked for you for 4 years. His jaw was tight. And your sister, the one you left to protect, the one whose well-being you decided was worth blowing up everything, was working with the man who put a knife in her in the first place. For 3 weeks, she's been handing you to him piece by piece. The silence after that was total. Somewhere below the house, she could hear her boys. A murmur of voices. Noah asking Cora something, the way Noah asked everyone something. Safe. They were safe right now. She thought about Mara at 11 years old, following her everywhere. Mara at 17, borrowing her clothes. Mara at 22, showing up at her college apartment with no money and no plan, and a certainty that Nora would fix it, because Nora always fixed it. Nora had always fixed it, and Mara had given her children's names to the man outside in the trees. "Where is she?" Nora said. "We're working on locating—" "Where's my sister right now?" A beat. The man at the laptop looked at Dominic. Dominic said, "She's at the Reyes property, 40 minutes south." "Voluntarily?" Another beat, longer this time. "We believe so," he said. She nodded. One small, tight nod. The way you nodded when the information completed a picture you'd already started building and you needed a second for the whole shape of it to settle. Then from outside, and not distant, not from the tree line, but close, from the east side of the property, came 3 sharp cracks that she recognized even though she had never wanted to recognize that sound and had specifically lived the last 4 years in a way designed to never have to hear it again. Gunshots. The man at the laptop was already moving. Dominic was already at the door, something in his hand that had appeared from somewhere, and he turned back to her once with an expression that was clear and direct and left no room for discussion. "Room below the house," he said. "Now." "The boys are already there. Go." She went. She ran. Down the hallway, through the closet door, down a staircase she hadn't seen, into a low-ceilinged room that smelled like concrete and recycled air. Cora was there. The boys were there. Noah on a cot with his blanket, and Jack standing in the middle of the room with his head up, listening. She crossed the room and dropped to her knees in front of Jack and put her hands on his face. He looked at her. His gray eyes were wide but not panicked. He was frightened. She could see that, could feel it in the slight tremor in his jaw. But he was holding himself together with a determination that was so familiar it knocked the breath from her. "Mom," he said. "I'm right here," she said. "Is Dad okay?" She had no answer to that. She had no answer to any of the things the next few hours were going to require answers to. Above them, something heavy hit the floor. Then silence. Then voices. Multiple. Overlapping. She couldn't make out words. Then Dominic's voice, cutting through the others, low and authoritative and alive. She exhaled. Jack was still looking at her. "He'll be okay," Noah said from the cot, with the certainty of someone who had decided this was true and was not currently open to alternate interpretations. Jack looked at his brother. Something passed between them. That specific twin communication she had watched all their lives, the language they'd built before they had words. And Jack nodded once. Then he turned back to Nora, and he said something that reached into the center of her chest and rearranged things that had been in the wrong place for 4 years. "It's okay that you didn't know," he said, "about whatever happened. You were trying to keep us safe." She stared at her son. "You're 4 years old," she whispered. "Almost 5, he said. She pulled him against her, and then Noah was off the cot and into her other arm, and she held both of them in that concrete room under the house, while the world above them was loud and dangerous and completely outside her control, and she understood, with a clarity that felt like something being surgically removed, that she had spent 4 years running from the wrong thing. She had run from Dominic, the man who had spent 4 years looking for her, while the woman she had protected with her entire life had been, for 3 weeks, dismantling every wall she'd built. The door at the top of the stairs opened. Footsteps. One set. Familiar weight, familiar pace. She had that in her body too, apparently, even after 4 years. Dominic appeared at the bottom of the stairs. A cut above his left eyebrow, not deep. His coat was gone. His expression was the specific controlled blankness that she now understood covered the thing underneath, the thing that was not blank at all. "It's clear," he said. He looked at the boys. He looked at her, with her arms around both of them on the floor of a concrete room, and she looked at him, at this man she had fled, this man whose children she had taken, this man who had apparently looked at an ultrasound photograph every day for 4 years. And she said the only true thing she had left. "I didn't know," she said, "about Mara, about any of it. I didn't know." He crossed the room. He sat down on the floor across from her, which was not something Dominic Varro did, sitting on floors. And he looked at her with everything he'd been holding behind glass for the entire night finally showing through it. "I know," he said. "I destroyed everything because of something I didn't understand." "You did. And you And I let you believe I might be dead rather than admit I didn't know how to find you fast enough. His voice was rough at the edges now. We both did damage, Nora. We just did it differently. Noah had fallen asleep against her shoulder. Jack was awake, listening, but quietly, in that Noah-ish way he sometimes occupied, the borrowed stillness. She looked at Dominic over the top of her son's heads. "What happens now?" she said. He looked at the boys, at Jack's gray eyes, already closing despite his best efforts, at Noah's dark hair against her shoulder. "Now," he said, "we deal with Reyes. We deal with Mara." He paused. "And then we figure out the rest." "The rest," she repeated. "There's a lot of it." She almost said something. She had something ready, some form of deflection, some protective distance she could deploy. She had gotten very good at protective distance. She didn't use it. She looked at the cut above his eye and said, "You need to get that cleaned up." He reached up and touched it, apparently having forgotten it existed. "Later," he said. "Now," she said, "before it closes dirty." He looked at her for a moment. Then he almost smiled. Not quite, not fully, just the ghost of it at the corner of his mouth. And it was the most disorienting thing she had seen all night, which was saying something. "You haven't changed," he said. She thought about the diner, the cold apartment, the $50 at a time in an emergency fund, the morning she'd gotten up at 4:55 and put one foot in front of the other because there was no other option. "I've changed completely," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." Above them, she could hear his men moving through the house, the controlled aftermath of something violent being cleaned up and contained. Outside, somewhere in the trees, Reyes still existed as a problem. Mara was 40 minutes south, apparently comfortable, apparently choosing a side that Nora still could not fully absorb. And here, in a concrete room under a house on the Oregon coast, Nora Voss sat on the floor with her sons asleep against her and looked at the man she had run from for 4 years and understood with complete and terrible clarity that the story she had told herself, the clean story, the story where she was the one who saw the truth and acted on it, was not the story that had actually happened. The real story was messier, worse in some ways, better in others, full of people who had failed each other at exactly the wrong moments, for exactly the wrong reasons. And it wasn't over yet. From Dominic's pocket, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His expression went flat in a way she recognized as bad news being received and immediately converted into action. He stood. "What?" she said. He looked down at her. "Reyes isn't negotiating," he said. "He's moved up his timeline." He pocketed the phone. "He's coming here. 30 minutes. She looked at her sleeping boys. "Then we don't have 30 minutes to waste," she said, and she stood up. And something shifted in her. Some final piece of the woman who had spent 4 years making herself small and careful and invisible, settling back into a shape she had almost forgotten. She was done running. 30 minutes. Nora had once read somewhere that the human brain, under genuine threat, stops processing time the way it normally does. That minutes compress or expand based on the body's assessment of survival probability. She had thought that was interesting, in an abstract way, when she read it. She understood it now with her entire nervous system. Dominic was already moving up the stairs. She followed him, one hand trailing the wall, and they came up into the main level of the house where everything had been rearranged in the 40 minutes she'd been below. Furniture pushed back. Men positioned at windows. The easy warmth of the house an hour ago replaced with something taut and purposeful that she felt on her skin like a change in air pressure. 4 of his men were in the main room. She clocked them without stopping. Positions, sightlines, what they were carrying. She had absorbed more about this world than she'd ever admitted during the 2 years she'd lived in it. "Talk to me," she said to Dominic's back. He stopped at the center table where the laptop was now running 2 screens. Exterior camera feeds, 4 quadrants each, the tree line in grainy night vision green. "Reyes is bringing 12 men," he said. "Confirmed. You have 8. 9. He looked at her sideways. 6 more 30 minutes out. Which is exactly when Reyes arrives. Yes. So they'll be useless. For the first engagement? Yes. He said it without inflection. This was information, not disaster, at least in his register. Which means we don't let the first engagement become the whole fight. She looked at the camera feeds, trees, driveway, the east side of the house where the earlier shots had come from, now quiet and dark. He wants leverage, she said. You said that earlier. He wants the conversation about money, and the children are how he starts it. Yes. So give him the conversation. Dominic turned to look at her fully. Before he gets here, she said. Call him. Give him the conversation he wants. Tie him up on the phone while your 6 men close the 30 minutes. The room was quiet. One of the men near the window, older, a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, looked at Dominic with something that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it. Dominic looked at Nora. You've been in a diner for 4 years, he said. I've been thinking for 4 years, she said. There's a difference. Something moved in his expression. He picked up his phone. Get me a line to Reyes, he said to the man at the laptop. She stepped back. She let him work. She watched him make the call, watched the specific transformation that happened when he was operating as the man who ran the Eastern Seaboard's criminal infrastructure rather than the man who had sat on a concrete floor across from his sleeping sons. It was a full-body shift, something in the shoulders and the jaw and the particular quality of stillness that preceded every word. She had forgotten how complete it was. She had also forgotten how effective. Reyes, his voice when the call connected was unhurried, almost warm. You're moving ahead of schedule. I respect the initiative. He listened. His face revealed nothing. I understand you have a position. I want to hear it. Longer pause. No, the children are not a relevant part of this conversation. I'm suggesting you reconsider making them one. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Because the alternative to this conversation is a different kind of conversation, and you've had enough of those to know how they end. The man at the laptop was typing with focused speed. She moved around the table to see the screen. GPS positions, she realized. His 6 incoming men, dots moving up the coastline road. 24 minutes out. She looked at the camera feeds. The tree line on the east side shifted slightly. Wind, or something else. East camera, she said quietly to the laptop man. He switched the east feed to full screen. The tree line was still. Then it wasn't. Dominic, she said it low and flat. He was still on the phone. He looked at the screen. His voice didn't change. I appreciate your perspective. Let me make a counterproposal. He held up 2 fingers to the man with the scar, who moved immediately toward the east side position. 4 men peeling from their spots without sound, without visible coordination, like a single organism responding to a signal she couldn't perceive. She had forgotten that too. The quality of the men around him, the caliber of the operation at this level. She had spent 4 years telling herself she'd escaped something purely dangerous. She had done a thorough job of forgetting that dangerous and capable were not always the same thing, and that the capability had also kept her safe for the 2 years she'd lived inside it. Dominic ended the call. How long did that buy us? She asked. 8 minutes. Maybe 10. He set the phone down. He's not interested in talking. He was using the call to confirm we were still on the property. I know. You know? You were too calm, she said. He needed to hear that you weren't scared, but he also needed to hear that you weren't moving. So he knows we're here and he thinks he has the advantage. She looked at the camera feed. Does he? Not for another 20 minutes. Then we hold for 20 minutes. He looked at her for 1 full second, the kind of look that cataloged and assessed in a way she'd once found destabilizing. You need to go back below. I need to stay up here so I know what's happening to my children. Cora is with them. Cora is excellent. I'm their mother. She held his gaze. I'm not going below, Dominic. Work around me or use me, but I'm not going. Another second, longer. Stay away from the windows, he said. And if I tell you to move, you move. No discussion. Agreed. He turned back to the room and started positioning, and she stayed against the interior wall and watched and breathed and kept her pulse by force of will at something approaching functional. The next 7 minutes were the longest of her life. She watched the camera feeds on the laptop screen, the tree line, the driveway, the east and north approaches. She watched Dominic's men settle into their positions with the disciplined quiet of people who had done this before. She watched Dominic himself move through the house with a flashlight he kept shielded, checking sight lines, adjusting a position here, a variable there, his face completely controlled and his eyes moving constantly. She thought about Jack and Noah in the room below. Noah probably asleep again. Noah could sleep through a thunderstorm, and often did. Jack awake, listening, doing the math in his 4-year-old way, reaching conclusions that would disturb her later when he articulated them. She thought about the ultrasound photo. Dominic had mentioned it in the car. No, he hadn't. He'd referenced it, said he'd kept it. She had filed it and not opened it because opening it meant something she wasn't ready for. She opened it now, standing against the wall of a house that was about to be breached, because apparently this was the mental space her brain had found to process the unbearable. She had taken the photo to surprise him. She'd had it in her bag the night she came home and found him in the study. She'd left with it still in her bag, had looked at it on the bus out of the city, had looked at it in the hospital when she delivered alone, had held it for a long time, and then put it in the envelope with the boys' birth certificates and never looked at it again. He had a copy. He had been looking at it for 4 years. She pressed the back of her head against the wall and breathed. The east camera flickered. "Movement," the laptop man said, very quiet. And then the night outside the house stopped being quiet. It happened fast. Everything she had been tensed for arriving simultaneously, from 2 directions, which was tactically sound and which Dominic had apparently expected because his men were already responding before she fully registered the sound. Glass on the east side, controlled entry rather than shattering. They'd cut it, she understood dimly. They'd prepared the entry point in advance, which meant Reyes had had someone on this property before tonight. The leak that was Mara. She pressed herself against the interior wall and did not move, which was the agreement, which was the only contribution she could make to the next 4 minutes that would not be a liability. The sounds were close and chaotic, and then suddenly not chaotic at all, but organized, and she understood that what she was hearing was not a firefight so much as a containment. Dominic's men had known where they were coming in and had positioned accordingly. 2 entry points, both anticipated. She heard voices, commands, the specific sound of physical impact that she did not want to categorize more specifically than that. Then Dominic's voice, from the east side, sharp and carrying. "Stand down! On the ground!" Silence. Then, "Clear." The man with the scar appeared from the hallway. "East is clear. 4 down. 2 detained." "North?" "Clear. 3 down. 1 ran." Dominic came back into the main room. He had blood on his left hand. Not his, she assessed automatically. The way the hand was moving said not his. And his breathing was elevated but controlled. He looked at the laptop screen. "Where's Reyes?" he said to the laptop man. "He wasn't with the entry team." The man's voice was flat with the specific flatness of bad information being delivered. "He held back." Dominic went completely still. "He sent 12 men and held back," he said. "Yes." Nora understood what this meant before Dominic said it, because she had learned Dominic's way of thinking well enough once that it was still in her somewhere, and the logic of it was suddenly, sickeningly clear. 12 men at the front. Noise, breach, engagement. All the attention on the house. And Reyes, who wanted leverage, not a fight, who had been told where the children were by someone who knew this house. "Below," she said. She was already moving. Dominic caught her arm. Not rough. Precise. "My man is at that door." "Your man has been at that door for the last 8 minutes while everyone up here was looking at the north and east approaches." She looked at him. "Reyes knows this house. Mara knew this house." His face changed. She pulled her arm free and moved. The closet door, the stairs, the specific sound of her feet on the concrete steps, and she hit the bottom and the room was wrong immediately. She knew it was wrong before she saw it, because Cora was in the corner with both boys against her, and there was a man between them and the stairs who was not one of Dominic's. He was young, mid-20s, trying to look like this was fully under his control, which meant it wasn't fully under his control. The specific body language of someone performing competence they didn't completely feel. He had a gun. He was pointing it at Cora and the boys. He was also, she noted in the 2 seconds she had to note things, pointing it with the held breath of someone who had not yet decided to use it. "Stop," he said. She stopped. 4 steps from the bottom of the stairs. Her hands came up, open, automatic. Jack was looking at her from behind Cora's arm. His face was white and completely still, and those gray eyes were fixed on hers with an intensity that she felt in her sternum. Noah's eyes were closed. He was pressed against Cora's side with his face turned into her shoulder, processing through avoidance, which was the Noah method. "Okay," Nora said. Her voice came out level. She did not know how. "Okay, I'm stopped." "Where's Varro?" "Upstairs." "Tell him to come down." "I can do that." She did not move. "Can I put my hands down?" The man looked at her hands. He was deciding. She watched him decide. "Keep them where I can see them." "Sure." She lowered them slowly to chest height, palms out. "What's your name?" "Doesn't matter. It matters to me." She kept her eyes on his face, not his gun. She had learned once, in a life that felt like someone else's, that you watched the face. The gun followed the face. "Mine is Nora. Those are my sons. The older woman is Cora. She just works here. She doesn't have anything to do with any of this." "I know who you are." "Then you know this doesn't need to go the way Reyes wants it to go." She took one slow step forward. He tensed. She stopped. "You came down here for leverage. You've got a room with a woman and 2 4-year-old kids, and if you use them as leverage, you are making a choice that there is absolutely no version of taking back. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" Something in his jaw shifted. Reyes is upstairs getting contained right now," she said. This was a calculated lie. Or maybe not a lie. She genuinely did not know where Reyes was, only that this was the psychology of the moment. "Whatever he promised you for doing this, he can't deliver it." "You don't know that." "I know Dominic Varro." She held his gaze. "Whatever you think is happening upstairs, it's not going Reyes' way. And when it's over, Dominic is going to come down those stairs, and the only thing that determines what happens next is what he finds when he gets here." The man's gun hand was not shaking. She had to give him that. He was frightened and in over his head, and he was still holding it steady, which told her he had training, which meant she could not close the remaining 4 feet before he made a decision. She heard footsteps on the stairs. The man heard them too. His eyes cut to the staircase for 1/2 second. Jack moved. She didn't plan it. He didn't plan it. She was certain he didn't plan it. It was purely the instinct of a 4-year-old who had his father's understanding of a moment and 0 of his father's experience with consequences. Jack pulled free of Cora's arm and ran, not at the man, but at Nora, crossing the room in 4 small, determined strides. The man's gun tracked him. Everything happened in the same moment. Nora moved forward. Dominic's voice from the stairs, hard and immediate. "Down!" The man's head turned. His gun hand dropped 6 inches. Not a decision, a startle response. And then one of Dominic's men was past her from the stairs, and the gun was somewhere else, and the man was against the wall with his arm behind his back, and Jack had crashed into Nora's midsection with enough force to push her back a step. She caught him. Both arms pulled him in, her face against his hair. He was shaking. She hadn't seen it while he was moving, but now that she was holding him, she could feel it. This fine, full-body tremor that he was doing everything to contain. "I got you," she said into his hair. "I got you. I got you." Dominic came down those last stairs. He took in the room. The detained man, Cora, Noah still pressed against Cora's side, Nora with Jack, and something in his face did a thing she had no language for, a thing that was too many things at once to name. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, in front of Jack, and he reached out and put one hand on the back of Jack's head, gently, just resting it there. And Jack, after one still moment, turned his face from Nora's shoulder and looked at him. "Okay?" Dominic said. Jack considered this with his father's gravity. "My hands are shaking," he reported. "That's normal." "It doesn't feel normal. It means your body worked the way it was supposed to." Dominic's hand was still on the back of his head. "It'll stop." Jack looked at his hands. He seemed to find this explanation technically adequate. Noah chose this moment to open his eyes. He looked at the room with the expression of someone returning from somewhere internal and finding the external situation has moved on without him. "Is it over?" he said. Nobody answered immediately, because from the top of the stairs came a voice she had not heard in 4 years, from a person she had built her entire escape around protecting, in a tone that did not match any version of that person she had stored in memory. "Tell him to let my guy go," Mara said, "or I'll make this significantly more complicated." Nora went cold from the sternum out. She turned. Her sister was standing at the top of the stairs. She looked the same, older, thinner, something behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. Or maybe had been there, and Nora had never wanted to see it. She was holding a phone like it was a weapon, which, in the specific context of this moment, it effectively was. "Mara," Nora said. "Hey, Nor." Her voice was flat and almost casual, the kind of casual that cost enormous effort to produce. "You look tired." The man with the scar was at the top of the stairs behind Mara, but not moving. Something in Mara's posture communicating that the phone mattered, that whatever was on that phone mattered, enough that he was waiting for Dominic's signal. Dominic had gone very still beside her, the particular stillness of someone who was calculating at high speed. "What's on the phone?" Nora said. Mara almost smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. 4 years of watching you, locations, dates, names, everything Reyes has on where you've been and who helped you get there. If I send this, she tipped the phone slightly. Every person who helped you disappear has a very bad week. Nora stared at her sister. Mrs. Caldera, she thought. Sal. The man who'd helped her get the new documents, who had a family in Sacramento and had never asked for anything in return. The network of small human kindnesses she'd survived on for 4 years. "You wouldn't," she said. "I'm trying to settle a debt," Mara said. "I don't particularly want to, but I will." "Mara," Nora's voice broke on it, just slightly, just at the edges. "They're your nephews. They are right here. What are you—" "I know what they are." Something crossed Mara's face. Pain, maybe, buried under whatever calculation had brought her here. "I need Dominic to let Reyes's man go and give Reyes a walk on the debt. That's all. Then this is over." Nora looked at Dominic. His face was unreadable. "What's the debt?" he said. His voice was so level it was almost gentle. 200,000, Mara said, from 3 years ago. A shipment Reyes lost through your distribution corridor. That loss was on his side of the exchange. He disagrees. I know he disagrees. Dominic looked at Mara the way he looked at problems, completely, without flinching. "And you've been working off the interest by feeding him information." Mara said nothing. "How long?" he said. "A beat. 18 months. Nora heard the number and something in her went very quiet. 18 months. That was not a desperate choice made under immediate pressure. That was a 1.5 years of decisions, each one compounding the last, each one a step further down a road that had ended here, in this room, with Mara pointing a phone at the people who had helped her sister survive. "Mara," Nora said. She heard her own voice, the emptiness in it. "Why didn't you just ask me for money?" "You didn't have any money." Mara looked at her directly for the first time. "You were a waitress in Oregon, Nora. You were barely keeping the lights on." "I would have figured it out." "You always figure it out." The flatness in Mara's voice cracked, just at the surface. "You always figure it out, and I always need you to, and I was tired. I was so tired of being the one who needs you to figure things out." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "And then it got out of hand. And then it was too late to come to you because what I'd already done was—" She stopped again. The phone was still in her hand. Dominic said quietly, "Put the phone down, Mara. Tell your man to step back first." "No. No anger in it, just fact. You're not negotiating from a position. You came here, to this house, during an active situation with a leverage play that has one move in it. You use that phone, you lose every card you have, and you make an enemy of me directly instead of through Reyes." He paused. "Put it down." The room was extremely still. Jack was pressed against Nora's side. She could feel his breathing, slower now than it had been, steadying by increments. His father's control asserting itself even in a 4-year-old's nervous system. Mara looked at Nora, not at Dominic, at Nora. And the look was complicated and guilty, and underneath all of it, somewhere deep and badly damaged, still the 11-year-old who used to follow her everywhere. "I'm sorry," Mara said, low, almost nothing. The phone came down. And then Reyes walked through the door at the top of the stairs with a gun at the back of Mara's head, and the man with the scar made a sound in his throat and went absolutely rigid, and Dominic said one word that she had never heard him say before in all the time she'd known him. A word she would have said indicated loss of control if she didn't know him well enough to understand it was the opposite. It was the sound of a man who had just identified the exact coordinates of the problem and was already 3 steps into the solution. Reyes looked down the stairs at all of them with the specific satisfaction of a man who believed he had just turned the room. "New terms," he said. And Dominic looked up at him with gray eyes, the same gray eyes that were pressed against Nora's left side, blinking up at the man on the stairs with something that was not fear, but was its own kind of reckoning. And he said, with complete quiet, the kind of quiet that had always meant the most danger. "You're going to put the gun down," Dominic said. Not a request. Not a negotiation opener. Just a statement of what was going to happen, delivered in the voice of a man who had already seen the end of this and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Reyes laughed. It was a short, humorless sound, the laugh of a man performing confidence for an audience that included himself. He was standing at the top of the stairs with the gun pressed to the back of Mara's head and his eyes moving across the room below him, counting, calculating, finding what he believed was an equation that worked in his favor. He was wrong. Nora could see that from where she stood. She could see it in the specific quality of Dominic's stillness, the way he'd shifted his weight slightly to his right, the way his hands were at his sides with a looseness that was not relaxation. "New terms," Reyes said again, slower this time, like they hadn't heard him the first time. "Varro settles the debt in full, tonight. Cash transfer, my account, before I walk out of here. And I walk out with the woman." He meant Mara. "Insurance until it clears." "No," Dominic said. "You're not in a position to—" "I'm in every position." Dominic took 1 step forward toward the stairs, which was the opposite of what every tactical instinct in the room said to do. And the sheer wrongness of it made Reyes's gun hand tighten and his eyes widen slightly. "You came to my house. You put a gun to a woman's head in front of my children. You have 6 men detained and 3 more who ran, and the 6 reinforcements you were counting on having by now are currently pulled over on Route 9 with the story I arranged 3 hours ago." He stopped at the base of the stairs, looking up. "There was never going to be a version of tonight that went your way, Reyes. I knew you were coming before you knew you were coming." Reyes' jaw tightened. "The gun is the last card you have." Dominic's voice was almost gentle. "And you don't want to play it, because if you play it, this stops being about money." The room was so quiet Nora could hear her own pulse. Jack had gone completely still against her side. Not the stillness of a frightened child, but the held stillness of someone following something important and not wanting to miss any of it. Mara was standing with her eyes forward, jaw set, not looking at anyone. Her hands were at her sides. She was breathing in the shallow, controlled way of someone managing severe fear with everything they had. Whatever else was true about Mara, she was not falling apart. Nora noted this in some distant, complicated part of herself. Reyes looked at the gun in his hand. He looked at Dominic at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at the man with the scar, who had not moved but whose entire body was an intention waiting for permission. Something shifted in Reyes's face. Not surrender, something more complicated than that. The specific recalculation of a man who had arrived at a table expecting different cards and was now doing rapid, unhappy math. "The debt," he said. His voice had changed, lower, the performance gone out of it. "We'll talk about the debt," Dominic said. "In the morning, through the appropriate channels, like businessmen." A pause. "Put the gun down." 20 seconds. Nora counted them without meaning to. Then Reyes lowered the gun. The man with the scar moved immediately. Smooth, professional, not punitive, just control. And then Reyes was against the wall with 2 of Dominic's men around him, and the gun was somewhere else, and the top of the staircase was just a staircase again. Mara stood where she'd been left, alone at the top of the stairs. Her arms came around herself, slowly, like she was cold. She looked down at Nora. Nora looked back at her. There was too much between them for this moment to hold. Nora understood that. This was not the conversation. This was the moment before the conversation. The moment when you looked at someone you loved and tried to find the shape of what was left after damage. And you couldn't do that in a stairwell with your children present and adrenaline still burning through your blood. She looked away first. Dominic was speaking to his men. Low, quick, decisive. The organized aftermath of violence. The specific choreography of cleaning up a situation and extracting the relevant parties and securing the perimeter. She had seen this before, twice, in the 2 years she'd lived in his world, and both times she had understood with complete clarity that this was not the life she had been raised for. She also understood, watching it now, that it was not chaos. It was order, a brutal and sometimes terrible order, but order nonetheless, and her children were alive and standing next to her because of it. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it. Cora appeared from somewhere and touched her arm and said, in the particular tone of someone who had worked for Dominic long enough to have weathered worse than this, "Come on, let me take the boys upstairs. Get them something warm." Nora looked at Jack. He was watching Dominic across the room with an expression that was too old for his face, too knowing, the expression of a child who was doing the work of understanding something enormous and refusing to look away from it. "Jack," she said. He looked at her. "Go with Cora. Take your brother." He held her gaze for a moment, checking something, confirming something, and then he nodded and took Noah's hand and went. Noah went with him the way he always went with Jack, trusting the navigation without needing to understand the route. She watched them go up the stairs, past the spot where Mara had stood, into the warmth of the house above. She exhaled. The room below was emptying. Reyes's man, who'd been against the wall with his arm pinned, was being walked out. Dominic's people moved in pairs, efficient and purposeful. Within 4 minutes, she was standing in the concrete room with Dominic and the man with the scar and the specific quiet of aftermath. "Mara," she said. Dominic looked at her. "Where is she?" "Upstairs. Kowalski has her." "I need to talk to her." "Nora." "I know." She held up one hand. "I know what she did. I know all of it. I still need to talk to her." She looked at him directly. "She's my sister." He held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded to the man with the scar, who moved. She found Mara in a small room off the main hallway. A sitting room, unused, 2 chairs and a lamp, and a window that looked out at the trees. One of Dominic's men was outside the door. Mara was in one of the chairs with her arms still wrapped around herself, staring at the floor, and she looked up when Nora came in and something crossed her face that was too raw to name. Nora sat in the other chair. She didn't say anything right away. Neither did Mara. Outside, she could hear the house settling back into itself. Voices, distant, movement, the specific sounds of order being restored. 18 months, Nora said finally. Mara's jaw tightened. "Yes." "You gave him my location, my son's names." "Yes." "Why their names?" A long pause. He already knew there were children. He wanted confirmation they were Dominic's. Mara's voice was flat, stripped of everything but the facts. "I gave him confirmation." Nora looked at her sister, at the thinness of her, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of a long time not sleeping well, at the hands that were white-knuckled around her own elbows. "How did you get into debt with him?" she said. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Mara looked at the floor. "After you left, after Dominic's people came asking about you and I told them I didn't know where you were, which was true then, after all of that." She stopped. Started again. "I was in a bad place for a while, using. Nothing serious, I told myself, which is what you tell yourself. And Reyes's people were everywhere. They were in every scene, and credit was easy, and it felt like just a bridge, just until I got back on my feet." She made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I never got back on my feet. You could have called me." "I know. Mara, I would have—" "I know." Mara's voice cracked on it, just at the edge. "I know you would have. That's the thing about you, Nora. You always would have. And I couldn't—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I couldn't be the person who calls you again. Do you understand that? I couldn't be that person one more time." Nora understood it. She didn't want to understand it, but she did. The specific shame of being the one who always needs rescuing, the way that shame could warp into something unrecognizable, given enough time and pressure and bad choices. "So instead you gave him my children," she said. "I know what I did." "Do you?" She kept her voice level. It cost her. "Do you understand that there was a man in the room below this house tonight with a gun pointed at your 4-year-old nephews?" Mara's arms tightened around herself. She didn't answer. "I need to hear you say it," Nora said. "I put them in danger." Mara's voice was barely audible. "I know that. You did more than put them in danger. You looked at two boys who have never done a single thing to you, who don't even know you exist, and you handed them to a man who wanted to use them. Nora's hands were flat on her thighs, pressing down, keeping everything in its lane. Whatever happened between us, whatever debt and shame and bad decisions brought you to this, that was my children. I know. 2 words, barely enough air behind them to carry. I don't know if I can forgive that. Mara looked up. Her eyes were dry. Whatever she was feeling, she was keeping it on the inside, which was the one thing they had in common that Nora had never appreciated until this moment. You don't have to, Mara said. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you it's going to take time, if it happens at all. Okay. And I need you to get help. Real help. Not a bridge, not a shortcut. Nora held her sister's gaze. I can't keep being the net you fall into, Mara. I can't do that and be what my sons need. Those 2 things don't fit in the same life. Mara was quiet for a long moment. Outside, something moved on the gravel drive. A car, voices, the ongoing logistics of a night being closed out. Dominic's going to want something from me, Mara said. For tonight. Probably. What do you think he'll want? Nora thought about this honestly. Information on Reyes. Everything you know about his operation, his contacts, his supply lines. She paused. In exchange, I'll ask him to settle your debt and cut you loose. No further obligation. Mara stared at her. You'd do that? Don't make me explain why. Just take it. Something in Mara's face broke, finally, at the surface. Not a collapse, just a fracture. A single crack in the held-together front that let something through. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, and then she lowered it, and she said very quietly, I'm sorry about the boys, Nor. I'm sorry about all of it. Nora looked at her sister, at what was left of the girl who had followed her everywhere, at what damage and time and bad choices had made of that. I know, she said, and she meant it, which was the most complicated thing she had felt all night, and the night had contained multitudes. She left Mara in the sitting room and went to find Dominic. He was in the main room, the laptop closed now, 2 of his men still present, but the crisis-level tension fully discharged from the air. He was standing at the window with a glass of water he hadn't drunk, looking out at the gray beginning of pre-dawn over the tree line. She stood beside him. They were quiet for a moment, the 2 of them, looking at the same darkness with the same exhaustion and the same complicated inventory of the last 12 hours. Mara will give you everything she has on Reyes, she said, in exchange for the debt being settled. I know. You knew I'd ask. I knew you'd ask, and I knew I'd agree. He set the glass down. I was going to offer it anyway. She looked at him sideways. Why? Because she's your sister, and because I've spent 4 years wanting to fix something I couldn't fix, and this is something I can fix. He turned from the window to look at her. It's not a grand gesture. It's just what's available. She held his gaze. In the early gray light coming through the window, he looked tired in a way she hadn't seen him look before. Not defeated, not diminished, but genuinely worn, the way a person looked when they'd been carrying something for a very long time. The ultrasound picture, she said. He was quiet. You kept it? Yes. How did you get it? I took mine with me. I had a copy made, before. He looked at the window again. You'd left it on the kitchen counter one morning when you went to get dressed. I had it in my wallet already. I don't know why. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't tell you I'd done it. A pause. And then you were gone and it was the only thing I had. She thought about him looking at that photograph for 4 years. One small black and white image. The specific blur of 2 small shapes. The date in the corner. Looking at it every day while not knowing if they were alive. I'm sorry, she said. He turned to look at her. I should have asked you, she said. That night, whatever I thought I saw, I should have walked through the door and asked you what was happening instead of... She stopped, breathed. I was so certain. I was so completely certain that I knew what I was seeing, and I didn't question it for 1 second, and that certainty cost 4 years. She held his gaze. That's on me, not on what you did or didn't do. The choice to run without asking was mine, and I need to own it. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. I should have come to you about Mara immediately, he said. When she arrived that night, I was managing the situation and I didn't think about how it would look, and I had no idea you'd seen anything. His jaw tightened. There are 100 moments where someone says one sentence differently and none of this happens. I know. 4 years, he said. 2 boys who didn't have their father. I know. That's not... He stopped. He looked at the window. He was working on something. She could see it, managing something that wanted to come out sideways and was insisting on coming out at all. I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because I don't know how to not say it. Because it's there every time I look at them. I know, she said again, and I'm not going to tell you it's fine because it's not. What I did caused damage that's going to take a long time to repair. She paused. But I'm not running anymore. That's all I have to offer right now. I'm not running. He looked at her. Something in his face settled, but not resolved, not healed, but settled, the way ground settled after something seismic, finding its new level. That's enough, he said. For right now. They stood together in the early light until Cora appeared in the doorway and said, with the particular apologetic tone of someone interrupting something important, "The boys are asking for their mother." She found them in the large room Cora had given them, both awake despite the hour. Noah was sitting up in bed with a look of benign alertness, apparently refreshed by what she estimated had been 45 minutes of sleep. Jack was standing at the window, looking out at the trees and the first gray light, and he turned when she came in. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of his bed and opened her arms, and he came into them immediately, all the careful composure of the last several hours releasing at once, and he pressed his face against her shoulder and just breathed. She held him. Noah climbed over and inserted himself under her other arm with the efficiency of long practice, and she sat in the early morning with both her sons pressed against her and the sound of the ocean a half-mile away coming through the glass, and she let herself be still. "Mom," Jack said, muffled against her shoulder. "Yeah." "Is Dominic our dad?" "Yes." "And he didn't know about us?" "He didn't." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you were sad sometimes at night?" She pressed her lips to his hair. "Some of it." "And now?" She thought about how to answer that honestly for a 4-year-old, which was the same as answering it honestly for herself because Jack's truth detector was extraordinary. "Now it's complicated," she said, "but the complicated kind, not the sad kind. Do you know the difference?" Jack thought about this. The complicated kind is when there's a lot of things happening at the same time, and you can't be sure yet how they're going to land. She pulled back to look at him. "Where did you get that?" she said. He shrugged, the half shrug. His father's shrug. "Noah said it once," he said, "about the time I broke his truck and was sorry, but also I kind of wanted the truck." Noah, from under her other arm, offered, "He gave it back eventually." "I did," Jack confirmed. She looked at both of her sons, these 2 specific and extraordinary people she had made and carried and raised on her own, in a cold apartment 4 blocks from the ocean, and she felt something move through her that was not happiness exactly, but was the precursor to it, the specific sensation of a wound no longer bleeding, the beginning of whatever came after. Dominic appeared in the doorway. He stopped there, not coming in. She understood that. He was reading the room the way he read everything, finding his position in it before committing. Noah looked at him. "You can come in," he said, with the air of someone managing a social situation on behalf of others. Dominic came in. He stood at the foot of the beds, hands in his pockets, and looked at his sons with the same face he'd had since the parking lot in Kessler, that enormous, carefully managed thing that was too big for any single expression. "You should sleep," he said to them. "We slept," Noah said. "Noah, 40 minutes is not..." She stopped. 45 minutes is not enough sleep. "I feel rested." "You're 4. "I know how I feel." Dominic made a sound. She looked at him and realized it was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him all night. Short, involuntary, immediately contained, but real. Jack noticed it too. He looked at his father with those assessing gray eyes and said, "You can sit down." Dominic sat down at the foot of Jack's bed. They stayed like that for a while. The 2 boys between them, the early light growing at the window, the ocean doing what the ocean did regardless of what happened to people near it. Nobody said anything important. Noah asked Dominic about the trees outside, and Dominic answered with a specificity that suggested he actually knew things about Pacific Northwest forestry, which she filed under the category of things she apparently didn't know about him. Jack asked if they were going back to the apartment, and she said not right now, and he asked where they were going, and she said she didn't know yet. And he accepted this with the equanimity of someone who had learned that not knowing yet was different from nowhere to go. At some point, Noah fell asleep mid-sentence, which was the Noah method, and Jack lasted another 20 minutes before exhaustion took him in the middle of looking out the window, his head dropping and then jerking up twice before he gave in. She and Dominic sat at opposite ends of the bed in the quiet and the growing light, and she looked at her son sleeping and thought about everything that had brought her to this room. "New York," Dominic said quietly. She looked at him. "When this is settled, Reyes, the loose ends, I want to bring you all home." He met her gaze. "Not a demand. I'm done making demands for at least the foreseeable future." The corner of his mouth moved. "But I want you to consider it. New York is where your operation is based. New York is where I live. Those are the same thing." "Sometimes," he said, "sometimes not. Sometimes." She looked at the window. The first real light now, the darkness thinning to gray to something that was almost color. Somewhere out there, Reyes was being processed into a set of consequences she understood in general terms, but preferred not to examine in detail. Mara was in the sitting room making decisions about what she was going to give up in exchange for a way out of a hole she'd dug over 18 months of choices. The world was not clean. It was not going to become clean. That was the truth she had been running from as much as anything else. The belief that there existed somewhere a version of her life that was free of complication and shadow, and all she had to do was find the right door. There was no such door. There was this: 2 boys sleeping, a man sitting at the end of a bed with 4 years of loss in his face trying not to ask for too much, too fast, and herself sitting up straight, tired to the bone and more present than she had been in 4 years. "I'll think about New York," she said. He nodded once. That was enough for him. She remembered that about him. He had never needed more than an open door. What he did with open doors was the thing, the relentless and specific thing, that had once felt like suffocation and now felt like something she didn't have a clean word for. Safe, maybe. The complicated kind of safe. Reyes was handed over to the kind of people who handled such things, which Nora understood without needing the specifics. The debt conversation happened in the morning, through the appropriate channels, as Dominic had promised. And the resolution of it was not justice in any classical sense, but it was finality. And she had learned to understand that those were different things, and finality was sometimes what survival looked like. Mara gave them 4 hours of everything she knew about Rhea's operation. She sat in the same small room, and she talked, in the flat, exhausted voice of someone performing the last task of a very long chapter. And Dominic's man took notes and asked questions, and she answered all of them without flinching. When it was done, she looked smaller than she had the night before, lighter in a way that was not comfortable lightness, but the lightness of someone who had put down something they'd been carrying too long. She left before noon. At the door, she stopped and looked at Nora, who had come to the entrance of the house without quite meaning to. "I'll get help," Mara said. It was not a promise exactly. It was more like an intention stated in front of a witness, which was what she could manage. "Okay," Nora said. "The boys—" Mara stopped. Started again. "I'd like to meet them, someday. If that's something you'd ever—" "Someday," Nora said. "Not yet." Mara nodded. She looked at her sister for a long moment, with all the history of it passing between them. Everything shared and everything broken, and the specific complicated love that did not stop existing simply because someone had done an unforgivable thing. Then she got in the car, and she was gone. Nora stood on the steps until the car disappeared down the drive, and then she went back inside. 3 days later, she stood on the Oregon coast with Jack and Noah, the ocean gray and enormous in front of them, and the wind off the water cold enough to make Jack complain and Noah ignore it entirely. Dominic stood a few feet back, where he'd taken to positioning himself, close enough to be present, far enough to not crowd what was hers. She had been watching him learn the distance. It was painstaking work, recalibrating a man who had spent his whole life occupying the center of every room, teaching him that a family was not a room to occupy, but something you moved around the edges of carefully until you understood its shape. He was doing it imperfectly and without complaint, which was more than she'd expected. Jack ran at the water and then retreated shrieking when a wave got his shoes, which was exactly what he always did, which would never stop being funny. Noah collected something from the sand, a shell, dark and unspectacular to any eye but his, and turned it over in his hands with focused reverence. Dominic appeared beside her. "He does that," she said, meaning Noah with the shell. "He finds things nobody else notices." "I know." He paused. "He gets it from you." She looked at him. "You notice things other people missed," he said. "It's why I—" He stopped, edited himself. "It was one of the first things I noticed about you." She turned back to the ocean. "You're going to have to do better than past tense. A beat." "It's why I still—" He stopped again. And this time she could see him working on it, this man who had always known what to say in every room because he had always been the most powerful person in it, finding that power entirely useless here. "It's why I want you in the same room with me for the rest of however long I have." The wind came in off the water. Jack was attempting to teach Noah to jump over the small waves, which was going poorly because Noah did not see the value of jumping without first understanding the physics. She thought about what she was agreeing to, the life that came with it, the specific gravity of it, the enemies and the risk, and the particular kind of vigilance required to love someone who operated the way Dominic operated. The difference between the life she'd been surviving and the life she'd been afraid to live. She thought about the ultrasound picture, one copy in her box of documents, one copy looked at every day for 4 years by a man who had not stopped looking for her. "New York," she said. He went still beside her. "We'll try New York." She looked at him. "Not because I'm done being scared. I'm still scared of what your world costs." She held his gaze. "But I'm more tired of running than I am scared. And my sons need their father." She paused. "And I'm apparently not done needing—" She stopped, because some things didn't need to be completed to be understood. He understood them. Jack came running back from the water with soaked shoes and a face full of the particular joy of deliberate self-inflicted consequences. And he grabbed Dominic's hand without preamble, without ceremony, with the casual certainty of a child who had made a decision and was done deliberating. "Come look at what Noah found," he said. Dominic looked down at his son's hand in his. Something moved across his face that he didn't manage in time, that he didn't try to manage. That enormous thing she'd first glimpsed in a parking lot in Kessler when he saw his children for the first time, here again and no less large. He let Jack pull him toward the water. Nora watched them go. Her sons and the man who was their father, standing on the edge of the Pacific, while Noah held up an unremarkable shell and explained with great seriousness exactly what made it remarkable. The ocean did what it always did, came in and pulled back, came in again. She had spent 4 years learning to hear it as loneliness. Standing here now, watching the three of them at the water's edge, she heard it differently. Not as an ending or a beginning, not as a metaphor for anything, just as what it was. Enormous and indifferent and still somehow, in the specific morning light, completely beautiful. She walked down to the water. Jack grabbed her hand when she reached them, so she was between her sons, and Dominic was on Noah's other side, and the 4 of them stood in a row at the edge of the Pacific while the waves came in, and nobody said anything, because nothing needed to be said, because some things were simply true now, and the truth of them didn't require language. The water came to their feet. Jack did not run away from it this time.